Hi, this is George Spalding, Executive Vice President, Pink Elephant, and we are going to spend a little time together having fun. It's one of those relatively content-free presentations, and so here we go. It's Halloween theme. Okay, that's enough of that. All right, so let's get rolling. So my goal for the next 30 minutes or so is to talk about the fact that when we mess up in this world of computers, it actually impacts people's lives. And I want us to get away from this concept of an act of God excuse. So it's time to get rid of this excuse which really is the excuse for bad or sloppy IT. So the next time anybody ever says to you, hey, I'm sorry, I can't help you, the computer is down, which translates into an act of God has occurred over which we had absolutely no control, and therefore you are subsequently completely, utterly, and totally screwed. Your response should not be, okay, gee, what a drag. No, your response should be, why? Why is your system down? What idiot messed up the project or the change or the release or the upgrade to the extent that your multi-billion-dollar processing system is now non-functional? That's what I want you to say. And let's see what kind of conversation ensues from that point. Okay, I'm going to play a pretty brief video to get us rolling today. At top, these are 10 glitches that caused chaos. You can obviously find these on your friendly YouTube channel, but here we go. Let me know as soon as I start this whether you can hear the music. It doesn't require you to hear anything because it's all written on the screen. Okay. I don't know whether you noticed, but that last one, World War III, was 1979, and it was about 3 years later that the movie War Games came out, where basically we had a computer that ran a simulation program, but everybody thought it was real. So there you go. All right. So let's get going. Let's talk more about that power outage. That was a fun one. So it was the worst blackout in U.S. history. 50 million people without power. $6 billion in damages. Some nine or 10 people died as a result of this. 265 power plants were shut down, and the power was off in a 9,300 square mile area, which is a lot of the eastern portion of the United States and some Canada. It was a very hot day in August. People were obviously using air conditioners. The power system got near capacity. It was very hot, so the power lines themselves actually sagged due to the heat and the higher currents, which also heats them up. If the lines touch trees, which basically grounds them, then they're automatically disconnected by the system as a safety factor. So inadequate tree trimming in one area caused 3 different lines to disconnect on the 14th of August. Well, this action was not taken by the independent systems operator. They were experiencing computer problems because the alarm processor was failing due to a bug in this case Unix. Alarm processor buffer filled up, overflowed. This resulted in the primary server failing and the failover to hot standby. The backup server then failed. Refresh rate on the operator consoles increased from 3 seconds to 1 minute, and no alarms were received for 90 minutes. Okay, while everybody is starting to go without power, the support staff's getting paged like mad because all of these servers are failing. Support staff performed warm reboots, and when the server came back on, the alarm system didn't know they were back on, stayed frozen, stayed not functional. No confirmation, literally calling people, talking to humans with operators, that alarm processing service was restored. And what we have here is not a change issue, but it's a process issue. So this was, without question, this was a comedy of errors. This was things building upon one thing, building upon another, on another. But there's no question that it was indeed focused around the world of IT. Okay, so flights down because basically the air traffic control system in the UK was down for an hour after testing of an upgrade. So you're going to see a lot of bad change management as we go through some of this stuff. So this one, Royal Bank, the Royal Bank in Canada, they began May 31st when it described as a routine programming update. We've seen those. Don't worry about this update. It'll be transparent to the users. Yes, that's my favorite word. This time, the bank's national system failed to register withdrawals, deposits, and payments against balances. Well, folks, as far as I'm concerned, that's what banks do. They withdraw, deposit, and register payments. So they were, as far as I was concerned, out of business. And it took them a goodly while to fix this. This wasn't fixed in a few minutes. There was a virus, a worm called the Sasser worm, which we're supposed to be able to handle these things in the big, fancy IT world. But what happened was that the reason the Sasser worm came out was because Microsoft had issued a fix. So Microsoft actually issued the fix. The hackers said, "Ooh, look, there's a vulnerability." By looking at the fix, they saw the vulnerability, created a virus or a worm that would exploit that vulnerability, and sent it out. So only a few people, small companies like Delta Airlines, American Express, Associated Press, 2 major universities, and a leading hospital, had delayed putting in the fix. So the idea is that the actual vulnerability was exploited because the fix was published. Zinc whiskers. I had to read this one a few times before I found out that this was actually true. So this was in Colorado state government. And the Secretary of State's computer system, now I'd like to point out, this happened a while back, but the Secretary of State is usually the officer in the state government who is responsible for running elections. So it's kind of a big deal. It was leveled for 6 weeks by an attack of zinc whiskers. Zinc whiskers are, in this case, metal shavings that are so small that they can actually get into the air. Okay, so we think that metal's heavy, so therefore it's going to just, fall to the floor. It's not going to be an issue. But in this case, we're talking about metal dust, if you will. Well, that metal dust started getting onto circuit boards, and those circuit boards started shorting out. So the comment in the news article, yes, things in Colorado are looking bleak, catastrophic even, as our own version of Hal from the movie 2001 extracts its cynical digital revenge. Computer glitch clogs airport. Grounded American Airlines and U.S. Airways flight coast to coast Sunday morning, causing delays that lasted all day. Once a computer issue happens at an airline or an airport, delays it enough, the domino effect of flights keep going and going and going, or keep being later and later and later, really kicks in. This happened in Michigan, but also happened in California. California was worse. But basically, we're now saying that systems are controlling or telling the authorities who to let out of jail. And in this case, Michigan, there was 23 prisoners that got out who shouldn't have gotten out. Well, in California, it was more like 1,000 prisoners who got out. Now, and in some cases, these were violent offenders. This is not people in there for smoking a joint or something. These are people who it was a real issue. And California never did go back to actually rearrest these offenders. So hopefully these types of glitches have been fixed. But when I say it starts to affect people's lives, this is certainly one aspect where it starts to affect people's lives. Computers delay loans to Katrina victims. So in 2005, we had the Hurricane Katrina, etc., and the reason was pretty ludicrous. So look at the third paragraph. Well, look at the second paragraph. Of the 28,000 emergency loan applications that had been received by Wednesday, only one check had been sent. Because of the new computer system, paperwork that once took 30 minutes now takes hours. Thank you so much for the upgrade. Workers for the Small Business Administration said the network that connects inspectors with their offices is frequently down. The workers in the field say they can't read the screens of their new tablet-style computers in the glare of the Gulf Coast sunlight. So this upgrade, this attempt to make things better, made it many times worse. These kind of stories, I'm afraid, abound with a little bit of IT from time to time. Tokyo Stock Exchange, worst outage ever. Spokesman said that the glitch appeared to be connected to the decision of expanding the trading system's capacity last month in response to a high trading volume. Change management. The modified system had worked, but crashed when the automatic monthly cleanup of the software was implemented. The backup system also failed because it uses the same software. That's a change management issue, release management issue, and definitely a process issue. And we didn't learn from that one. We got another computer glitch in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Dow Jones, average falling faster than normal, where the actual computers controlling the reporting of stock prices back was faulty and had faulty code in it. Cadillac recalled because the computer glitch that can shut down the engine has resulted in an order by the NHTSA to recall the two General Motors automobiles or models. And it may have a situation where fuel is no longer supplied to the engine. So in other words, as you well know, most of your cars are just computers with wheels and the ability to steer. So if the computer doesn't, and I actually had this happen I don't have a Cadillac, but I had it happen on one of my cars where I pushed on the gas and there was no gas. didn't go forward. The engine did not rev. And it was because the computer was not telling the electronic fuel injection to push fuel through. Surprise, surprise. Okay. Here's a wonderful shot of Atlanta where basically a computer created a bomb scare. There was no bomb scare, but the software registered a bomb scare, forcing the entire evacuation of the airport. And this one was actually in London, where all of the bags for a number of international flights just never made it on the plane. And it was all due to computer coding. Oh, this is great. Yeah, these are boats. These are ships. So these large ships with about 5,000 people on them. And this was the first example of it. The Crown Princess set sail for New York 2 days after an emergency at sea that injured 260 people, 2 of them critically, and are still in the hospital. What happens? The boat started to list to the right because the computer was telling the ship to list into a turn, was to make a turn so fast that the boat couldn't help but start to tip over. And this was the computer, the autopilot, that was actually doing it. So as if to say, well, this must be just a one-off. Nope. Another princess ship was doing it earlier, and this one was out of Galveston. So a different ship within the same, probably the exact same software, the exact same model, right, had the same problem. So either a computer glitch or a malfunction of one of the servers, said retired Navy Vice Admiral Jack Shanahan. So this means that the ship tipped so far over that people fell against things. Hopefully they fell against the railing, because nothing was ever reported that anybody fell overboard. But of course, we think of these things as moving cities that are super stable, etc. Watch out for the autopilot. Computer glitch leads to a brawl. You saw in the video that there was a riot in the Philippines when Pepsi had declared, hundreds of people millionaires. It was a glitch in the software. Well, in this case, the store was running a promotion that would give away $10 to anybody applying to a credit card. But a computer glitch led to everyone's application being granted and giving every person $4,000 in instant credit. So things got a little heated, a little messy. You remember, of course, the Equifax data breach, which just happened last summer. 150 million data records exposed, including mine. And the entire reason for the breach was because there was a known vulnerability, which they had a known patch for, and they simply delayed putting in the patch. And I don't mean delayed for a day. I mean delayed for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. They knew about this security vulnerability, and they had the patch. They just didn't put it in. Whatever reason, they didn't put it in, but suddenly we have 150 million credit card numbers, social security numbers, everything that any hacker needs in order to get you. So immediately, a whole lot of us started freezing our credit and going and signing up for programs that allowed us to do things on our phone that we couldn't normally do. Anyway, it was a mess. And of course, tonight, the vague nice part is somebody got fired over it. But, when you get fired over messing 150 million people, this is my favorite that I've ever seen. I thought this was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. Hackers can turn your home computer into a bomb and blow your family to smithereens. Sickos can wreak death and destruction from thousands of miles away. Well, that certainly is true. They can certainly hack into your computer, and most of us have hopefully antivirus plugged in our computer, hopefully anti-malware, and I strongly urge you to always have something blocking your camera. They make these little slider things now, so I certainly urge you to do that. I just thought this was the funniest headline from basically from a cheap newspaper you pick up at the cash register. Just funny. Okay, so who's going to fix all this? Well, good news. The U.S. government was decided to get involved, so because I don't have a whole lot to do, I actually read some of these documents that the government was publishing. In this case, it was a while back, but you'll see my concern in a minute. So this was during the George Bush administration, so it was, remember, this was right after 9/11, so which happened in September 11th, of course, 2001. So now here we are the following year. We got a Homeland Security guidelines, the National Strategy for Homeland Security. National Strategy, this is, now a little bit further to secure cyberspace. And then, which included, by the way, some really pretty pictures and things that made it look really modern, which is good. And also this was, I know in those days, this may not look like modern mouses to you or mice to you, but okay. And this was just the beginning of flat screen. So that's actually a pretty cool looking flat screen for 2003. Then around that same time, they published this one called The Physical Protection of Critical Infrastructures and Assets. Now, when they talk about the government, when they talk about infrastructure, they're not talking about what we talk about when we talk about infrastructure. They're talking about dams and reservoirs and roads, that kind of infrastructure, which is absolutely critical to making our world livable and safe. Okay, so I started delving into that particular document, and I got to the part where it said, okay, well, this is how we're going to do this. We're going to use computers to model and simulate potential threats. Now remember, this is 2003, and let's take a little closer look at that picture. That is, yes, an IBM PC XT, which was released in 1983. I don't know how many of you want to stake your security or safety on a 20-year-old desktop computer, which, by the way, for those of you who are even old enough to recognize what's in the background, that is an Okidata dot matrix printer, which, trust me, they didn't really have many of those even in 2003. So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so what's the deal? Well, when we looked at IT since the beginning of IT, pretty much it was indeed the wild, wild west. When we talked about the fact that, and when you think about where did IT start, well, all the way back in the 1950s, there were things called computers, and there were UNIVAC and those kinds of things, and they had nice little blinky lights on them, and they actually showed up on TV, and we all thought it was magic, of course, at the time. And if you haven't seen the movie Hidden Figures, I urge you to see that for a lot of reasons. It's really a great movie on a lot of different levels. But one thing that happens during Hidden Figures is NASA, the space program, gets their first computer. It's a big IBM mainframe. But the best part is it doesn't fit through the door. That's my favorite part. And so they have to get sledgehammers and take out the door and all that stuff in order to get the computer into the room, which is tons of fun. And so this was kind of the age of the cowboy. Project plan? Hey, what project plan? Don't need a change management? Nah, it takes too long. Let's just do it. Okay, so, and this was pretty much, in many cases, a little bit true right up until the end of 1999, when we had this watershed event that we all know and love called Y2K. Y2K was, in some ways, the worst thing we could do because we caused it by putting in two-character dates all the way back in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, without recognizing the fact that we were going to roll over a new century, and what are we going to do about that? But it was all basically to save memory, this precious, precious commodity, memory, which there was so little of at the time. So anyway, we finally had Y2K, and we did pretty well. I thought it was our finest hour in many cases. We fixed it. We fixed everything in time. It was the ultimate IT project that couldn't slip. So then, right after Y2K, things started to tighten up a bit. We had 9/11, and then right away we had Enron and WorldCom, and we started to have some fraud issues. And while IT, if you look at, was IT involved in Y2K? Of course. Was IT involved in 9/11? Not really involved in it, except that suddenly we discovered that the super cops that we thought were perfect, FBI, were running very outdated computer systems and very outdated databases that wouldn't talk to each other. So then we immediately get hit with Enron and WorldCom, and suddenly, while IT is not really implicated in the fraud part of it, it's easily known that all of those numbers, of course, were stored in computers and could have been audited pretty effectively in a different way. Anyway, times changed right after Y2K, no question about that, and we became kind of the world of best practices. That's when ITIL started to come into prominence. That's when COBIT started to move into new versions. So they started in the 90s but moved into new versions in the 2000s. So everything started clicking up. So you'll understand the context for this in a minute. So have you ever built a house? Have you ever even done a smaller construction project, like added a room onto your house, or had it done by a contractor? You didn't have to do it yourself. Well, there was always a plan, there was basically a project plan, and here's what it's going to look like, and here's when I'm going to do this, and here's when I'm going to do that. There's functional specs, what I needed to actually accomplish, operational specifications as to how that's going to work. There's going to be drawings, there's going to be approvals, there's going to be doing it, actual executions, and then even before it's done, there's going to be inspections, and the people who are doing the inspections are certified people. They have certifications in various inspections like electrical and plumbing and construction techniques and things like that. Okay, well, that's good. All right, well, now as we move into this world after 2009, 2010, we're starting to get a little more compliance-oriented, starting to get a little, moving that way in the world of IT. We're starting to get a few more regulations, but some of it, in so many words, is saying, hey, get your act together. There's no really discussion of how we're going to do it, but we really suddenly need to kind of do it. SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, COBIT, prime examples of this. Okay, so here's the really scary part. So as all of you know, whether you know it in great detail or not, it's not important. We've got building codes. You can't build it the way you want. You have to build it the way the code says. We've got plumbing codes. You have to use this material. You have to connect it this way. You can't connect it that way, this kind of thing. We've got electrical codes. You have to put a GFI outlet if it's near water, etc. All of those types of things. And now we move to us. Okay, well, we've got networks. We've got infrastructure, and when you look right now at our networks, at our infrastructure, we are moving, I would say, based on what I've seen and based on the research I've done, we're moving a good 50%, if not more, of the world's economy across our networks and across the internet. Our networks and the internet together. So, but where are the codes? Where are the codes for our plumbing? We even use plumbing terminology. We say, I need a faster internet. I need a bigger pipe. We say those words. So are we going to now have infrastructure plumbing? Are we going to have codes? Or are we just going to stay in this kind of scary Wild West world? So I think we're probably inevitably going to have some sort of codes. It's going to get more and more and more structured. There's going to be more and more and more compliance. My question is, who's going to write the codes? Are we going to wait for the government to write the codes for our infrastructures? Or are we going to allow public cloud vendors to write the codes. Obviously, they write their code, in essence, the codes. When I say code, I'm not talking about software code. I'm talking about regulations. I'm talking about compliance as to how you structure it and how you set it up and what kind of backup mechanisms you have and what kind of single points of failure you have. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about codes. I'm talking about it like building a house. So are we going to have compliance? We're going to have inspectors, much the same way we have visits by software companies in order to make sure that our licensing is in shape. And if we're going to have such codes, and I don't know any right this second, but I have to believe this is happening, there's too much at stake. And there's too many headlines about the people who, quote, aren't following the code. Equifax, a prime example. Target, a few years back, prime example of major companies with huge impact because they're not doing X, Y, or Z. So who's going to write it? I hope it's not going to be the federal government, because I don't think the federal government really are the people. I watched the hearings, as many of you did, where Facebook was in front of Congress, the Senate and the Congress, and it didn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling as to how much, or more correctly, how little our congressional leaders knew about what Facebook even was. I wasn't sure that they knew what the internet was. So the how that we do this so that we don't have things like Equifax, that's going to have to be codified by practitioners. It's going to have to be us. It's going to have to be the people who actually know. And there's going to have to be some leadership from Washington that says we need it, but it's going to have to be us who really write it. So remember, there are three kinds of people. There's those who make things happen. There's those who watch things happen. And there's those who wonder what happened. So I believe in today's IT, improvements are not optional. They're mandatory. This is not something we really have a choice about. We really have to get on the ball and recognize that we're the ones who are going to do this and have to do it ourselves. So I want you to go out there and make IT happen. Hey, and have a good Halloween. Oh, I have one thing to leave you with before we sign off. So I was talking to a guy who used to work at the Domino's Pizza IT shop, and he said, he was giving us a little quiz. He said, okay, what do you think the number one biggest day for pizza delivery is? And almost all of us said Super Bowl Sunday. And then a couple of us said New Year's Day after New Year's. And he said, nope. The number one heaviest load on the Domino's infrastructure, the most pizza that's ordered on any given day in a year is Halloween. And you can see that, right? You rush home from work, your kid is home from school, you've got to get them all dressed up and but in whatever ridiculous costume they're wearing this year, and you certainly don't have time to deal with dinner, so you call Domino's and you get your pizza delivered. It's the number one day for pizza delivery, and now you know it too. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. Time's up. Bye now.